Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and Chief Operating Officer of the Milken Institute, Richard Ditizio.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome. I know some of you have been with us since breakfast at 6:15, so we're going to test your stamina this evening. We've had a wonderful kickoff on the first day to the conference, and hopefully you've been able to enjoy the various streams of content that we've provided for you. I want you to pay attention to all of the people coming from all different parts of the world. There's really an efficiency factor to what we do. We bring the world to you each year across the fields of medicine, financial markets, philanthropy, etc., so that you can have an opportunity to see the world through new eyes and change your perspective. So I encourage you to go to those panels that have nothing to do with your day job. Try and understand how the interconnectedness of these things really do impact one another, why advances in medicine matter, and how they can be funded with financial markets. It is all really connected, and we've got 2 more days, but before we begin those 2 days, we've got an evening for you today based on our theme of the world in transition. So we've assembled some speakers who will present various lenses through which we'll examine challenge and change as the world continues to transition. We'll start with Juan Enriquez. He's a venture capitalist, a futurist, and the co-author of Evolving Ourselves. Juan's going to discuss where evolution is taking humankind next. Then we'll go to the cradle of civilization, Africa, and we'll bring out Precious and Patrice Motsepe as one of our compelling couples. They've witnessed enormous change in their native South Africa, and as South Africa's first black billionaire family, have committed to eradicating poverty there. And lastly, we'll hear from James and Suzy Amos Cameron, who will discuss how their passion for the environment has led them on a crusade to change the way we eat. So let's begin with Juan, and we'll start with a short video introduction.
Best-selling author, businessman, and academic, Juan Enriquez examines the intersection of science, business, and society to learn where our species may be headed next.
What I think we are doing is we're transitioning as a species into a Homo evolutus that, for better or worse, is not just a hominid that's conscious of his or her environment, it's a hominid that's beginning to directly and deliberately control the evolution of its own species, of bacteria, of plants, of animals, and I think that's such an order of magnitude change that your grandkids or your great-grandkids may be a species very different from you. So good evening, I'm your warm-up act. And I know you're all thinking, hey, there's nothing like a good lecture on gene research to just kick off the evening. So as you're thinking about that, let's start this story. We could go to the first slide. Let's start the story with what happened a long, long time ago. So a long, long time ago, here is a complete and accurate picture of the entire universe. There was basically nothing. And out of this little single pinprick of energy, you had an absolutely unimaginable explosion. So about 14 billion years ago, you begin getting, as Carl Sagan would say, billions and billions of galaxies. And they form in things that look like this. So these are clouds of interstellar dust. And if you look at those little tiny columns in the middle of this, let's just take a close-up of that. So just to give you an order of magnitude, each of those is about 1 trillion miles high. These are actually quite large. And what's happening here is you have so much dust that the gravity of each individual piece of dust fuses and creates birthing of stars. So what you're looking at the end of these columns is how stars are born. And it's really quite an extraordinary phenomenon. And as you create billions of stars, you get galaxies. And just to give you a context, this is a relatively normal galaxy, and you are about here. So you're sitting in a star that was created about 2/3 of the way through the history of the universe, and there was a little bit of dust left over, and that dust didn't come close enough to fuse, so that created a planet that you may be familiar with. Not a particularly important planet, except for us. Not a particularly unique planet, except for us, insofar as we know. And life is created almost immediately after that planet is created. So what's fascinating about the system is how quickly you got life after the planet comes to be, which may indicate that life is a more common phenomenon than one might think. Life comes out of this primordial soup, and then it goes kaput. And it goes kaput actually 5 times. So you have this extreme spring cleaning where you get life, and then almost all life gets wiped out. And then you get life, and it almost gets wiped out. And then you get life, and it gets wiped out. And you get the cycle. And the cycle creates increasing complexity, increasing structures of life order. And the bottom line on this is about 99.96% of the history of the universe takes place before the first versions of anything approaching a human being takes place. So somehow the universe was able to survive without us. And as you're looking at this, there's 2 theories of the case. So theory number 1, that's all she wrote. The history of the universe and of these 14 billion years and of 14.6 billion years of history of evolution, 4 billion years of sun, is to create us. And then it flatlines. And that's it. You know, that's the end of history. If that were true, one would have to ask the question, are these trillions of stars and these trillions of planets all leading to this and this? And that's it. It doesn't get any better. Well, that's one theory of the case. One question might be, of course, is that slightly arrogant? And if it is, then you would expect to see a continued evolution, and you'd expect to see continued change, and you'd expect to see other forms of life being created. And if that's true, one of the things you have to understand is there have been many versions of us, and many versions of us never made it. And we came darn close to going extinct, which is why every single person in this room descends from a single African mother. And everybody in this room of European descent descends from basically 7 European mothers. Not because that mother was particularly special, but because it's hard to have kids who have kids who have kids that survive tigers and plagues and floods and fires and war. As you're thinking of that, we almost never saw any of these characters or any of the other 7 billion humans. So here's a second theory. As you're thinking of a second theory of this, maybe we might upgrade someday. Maybe we aren't the be-all and end-all of evolution. Maybe we're not the sole purpose of the creation of the universe and all these stars and all these planets. And there's some evidence to this, right? We keep seeing version after version after version of hominids, and the really weird thing is we see only one today. But we keep discovering different versions. And about every year or two, you find a new fossil record that tells you the history of this planet doesn't usually have a single version of a species of a hominid on it. And in fact, we coexisted. Let's go back one slide, please. If we could go back one slide, thank you. We coexisted with several versions of these hominids. We interbred with at least 3 versions of these hominids. everybody in this room who is not of African descent has 1.5 to 2% Neanderthal in their bodies. And the rumor has it the proportion is slightly higher in DC. But what that tells you is the normal state of humans is to have one version of an African elephant, an Asian elephant, previous elephants and mammoths, and it was the same with humans. And we coexisted with these folks for a long time. So we're in a very odd state where we are the only ones. And to have a different version of a human, of a hominid, how big do the mutations really have to be? Well, if you ask Svante Pavo, the net difference between humans and Neanderthals is actually very small. And it has to do with these genes. And using technologies like CRISPR, you could create a Neanderthal if you so chose. Or you could create a different version of a hominid that would be as different from a Homo sapiens as a Neanderthal, and it wouldn't be very hard to do. These mutations keep occurring. About 10,000 years ago, near the Black Sea, you had a mutation that gave you blue eyes. Turns out to be a very attractive mutation. So it spread. You go to the Himalayas, one of the questions is, do you have an ACE gene? That allows you to climb 8,000-meter peaks without oxygen. So as you look through these things, you begin to find catalogs of different genes, some of them from our predecessors, some of them from other animals, that someday you may wish to incorporate into a human genome. And as you're thinking about this stuff, there is a slight propensity among us to do some of these procedures. This number has now increased, so there's probably about 15 million plastic surgery alterations done in the United States. And some people have told me they're not all done for strictly medical purposes. We have a propensity to want to experiment with our bodies. We have a propensity to want to alter our bodies, to enhance our bodies, to upgrade our bodies. And some of the technologies that are coming online are going to make current plastic surgery look pretty tame. We're beginning to print organs. We're beginning to print skin. We're beginning to print tracheas. We're beginning to print bladders. We've transplanted those into humans that are alive today. We are going to continue to do so with a whole series of organs. Tony et al. Is working on about 32 of them. And as we do so, we may not copy exact. We may want to change to have this, or to have that, or to have a gene that makes us more athletic, or a gene that allows us to sprint, or a gene that allows us to absorb more oxygen. And this is the whole catalog that's being built. And it seems like nothing happens, and it seems like nothing happens, and it seems like nothing happens. And then there's these very short periods of time where everything changes. We reach a tipping point in technology where things completely change. One of the companies that I co-founded with these two gentlemen created the first synthetic life form. So we didn't alter a gene in a cell. We took all the genes out of a cell and inserted a completely new genome and made that a different species. That is a little bit like building an iPhone and then having a series of apps that allow you to execute photographs or spreadsheets or love letters or searches, except that these are things that live, and they scale fast. And once they start scaling, then you can reach agreements with little startups like ExxonMobil to create almost carbon neutral fuels on a commercial scale by 2025, or to make the world's vaccines in a very short period of time. in a week instead of in a year. Or to substitute for most agricultural lands producing oil or protein. So in the same ways you saw very large-scale disruptions happen with the digital revolution, you are likely to see some very large-scale disruptions happen first in organic products and eventually even in humans. Let me give you some idea of what's happening. So one experiment took cells from this mouse, turned them into stem cells, which are the cells that can differentiate to become every part of the mouse's body, and then grew an identical mouse out of those cells. So you take a skin cell, make it a stem cell, let that grow, and you copy that mouse exact. That's a little bit like a skier at the top of a mountain. That skier is basically you at conception. You're conceived with your mother and your father. You create a single pluripotent stem cell that divides into 2, 4, 8, 16. And as it does so, that can become almost anything. But at some point, you have to choose which way you're going to ski down, so those skin cells become bone, and then the bone can differentiate into platelets, or into macrophages, or into T cells, or into muscle. And basically, depending on which pathway those cells take, they become the different bits of your body. The really big deal is, Yamanaka figured out that using 4 chemicals, you can turn almost any cell back into a pluripotent stem cell. So it's like a ski lift that takes that cell from your bone, from your stomach, from your eye, and makes it a pluripotent stem cell again. And that stem cell can become any part of your body. We can take human skin cells and make them stem cells. We can begin to differentiate those stem cells into liver. Here's a second experiment. It's not just that you can rebuild every part of your body using your existing gene code. It's that folks like Ed Boyden have figured out how to take a retrovirus, which is harmless, tag it with a fluorescent protein, and infect every brain cell. And the interesting thing about doing that is it means that every single brain cell becomes something you can tag and observe, and you can image in 2 colors, which means you can differentiate, activate brain cells individually in binary code. And of course, you can write almost anything in binary code. You can write photographs, you can write information, you can write anything you wish. About 99% of the data you're using today is in binary code. It's no longer an analog. Maybe you could download your memories. Because Mary Lou Jepson's out there and showed live on stage at TED 10 days ago an instrument that may allow you to get a 1-neuron resolution in a non-invasive fashion, which creates a portable MRI, which allows you to dose chemotherapy in a different way, which allows you to activate neurons selectively, maybe read memories. And of course, if you can rebuild your entire body using your own stem cells, and you can download your memory, that might have a consequence or 2. What's the bottom line on all this? I think we're on the single most exciting adventure our species has ever been on. There's a whole lot of noise out there. There's wars, there's recessions, there's small amount of political infighting. But while all this is going on, for better or worse, we're taking control over the evolution of life on this planet. We're doing it by designing viruses, bacteria, altering animals, and even by altering ourselves. And as we think about that, that is truly the most transcendent thing that we are doing. It's the most exciting and challenging thing we are doing. And not all of you have to become molecular biologists, but if you're in business, if you have kids, if you're in policy, if you're in ethics, if you're in education, this stuff matters. It may seem like stuff that just people are doing in these odd labs somewhere, but when the history of the 21st century is written, and the late 20th century, this is the stuff that changes history. So pay some attention to it. It's a hell of an adventure. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Juan. Didn't realize part of the transition was going to be our actual bodies, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. So now we're going to bring out my friends Precious and Patrice, and before we do, I have a brief video introduction for them.
Patrice and Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe were both born and raised in Soweto, South Africa. Married since 1989, they have seen their country and their personal status undergo unimaginable change.
I must say, the Motsepe family is what it is, and I am what I am because of the love and the support of many, many, many people in this country.
As founder and president of African Rainbow Minerals, Patrice is his country's first black billionaire. A former medical doctor and fashion entrepreneur, Precious Motsepe now administers the family's foundation. Together, they are on a mission to give back and inspire others.
Believe in yourself and believe in your own dreams. Don't let anybody steal those away from you.
The initiatives of the Motsepe Foundation touch on nearly every aspect of life in South Africa. Education, especially STEM for young women. Sports, with their own football league. Worship, with a National Day of Prayer. Not to mention music, arts, and conservation. As signers of the Giving Pledge, they are well on their way to giving more than half their wealth to philanthropic causes.
So we must all work together and recommit ourselves to the future of all of our people.
Thank you. So, Patrice and Precious, what an extraordinary journey. I want to go back to you grew up in a very different South Africa with apartheid. Could you have envisioned the future that you've had? And when you think back on it, what inspired you, Patrice, to start your business? And what about that experience of growing up as a black person in an apartheid society informed how you thought about that?
See, my mother said she must always answer first, you know. So.
No, that's not my mother-in-law. Thanks. What a wonderful evening. Thank you for having us here. As you correctly said, we both grew up in the township of Soweto. That's the same township where Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, who's also very well known, also grew up, including the very famous Soweto uprising of 1976. At that time, I was a young girl, probably in middle school, when these disruptions came. How did that inform and shape who I am today? I think from very early on, I realized, well, firstly, my parents were a big influence in my life. We grew up in a very God-fearing family. We went, Patrice will tell you the same, we went to Christian schools. We were in a Catholic church. We had very strong family faith values. And education for my parents was the one asset that they could give to us to help us get on with life. And I always tell my children, we have 3 sons, I always say to them, my dad believed so much in me, and that is the other big asset that he gave me. You know, he used to tell his siblings, this is my daughter, you ain't seen nothing yet. You know, he was so proud of me. And that instilled...
He was quite right.
Well, that instilled a sense of self-confidence that nobody else, nobody in this world could tell me otherwise, because my dad had told me I was good enough. So Soweto for me was never an obstacle. I knew there were better things out there in life for me. I had to work hard to achieve them, and they supported me in my journey.
And Patrice?
Well, it's always useful to look at South Africa, our upbringing, in a global context. I remember when I was a young South African and I went to the United Nations for the first time, and I saw people from all over the world. Very inspiring, because we grew up in a country where there were lots of exceptionally good things, but there were also lots of exceptionally bad things in terms of our history of racial segregation. But side by side with an apartheid, discriminatory, segregated society were people from different races who cared for each other, who loved each other, and the religious upbringings of all of us had a very important role to play in uniting all South Africans. And even though there were laws that said that black and white should not live together, and I think that's partly why Nelson Mandela turned out to be this conciliatory, accommodating, understanding person, because even before he went to jail, he had the privilege of growing up in a multiracial, multicultural environment. So he recognized that you had a minority whose fears you could understand. 4 million white South Africans, close to 40 and now 50 million black South Africans. If you give votes to all the black South Africans, you've got a permanent government that is controlled by blacks. But the bottom line for us is to look at South Africa, and we learn a lot from America, and we get inspired immensely. I think there is no country in the world that, as South Africans, in terms of its multiracial, multicultural history, teaches and inspires us as much as this country. So at the end of the day, we live in a very competitive world, and we need to make sure that we provide the best possible education for our people as a country, but we have to make our humble contribution and make sure that South Africa is the best possible place for our people to live in, both black and white.
Well, and coming from that background and then being so successful in business, you then both decided as a family to be the first family from Africa to join the Giving Pledge. So what made you do that? Why was that the route that you decided to take around your philanthropy?
You know what is interesting, and Precious will add, is that we are successful and have achieved because so many people along the way encouraged, motivated, gave us a helping hand from a very young age. And as you grow up, you have the strong conviction that you have a duty to give back because so much love and so much assistance and help has been given to you by black and white South Africans. So there's that, and of course our values and norms. We grew up in a very Catholic, we both went to Catholic schools, but I came from a family, my grandfather was an entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur. My father was a very successful entrepreneur. I used to stand behind the counter in our family businesses when I was 5 years old. And that's why I didn't know what it meant to be a lawyer when I was 7 years old. But every time we came back from boarding school, they would put me behind the counter from 5 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock. And I said, I never want to stand in a counter. And I thought, maybe I should become a doctor. And I thought, I don't like the sight of blood, you know. So, but the bottom line as well is what I also said yesterday is that there's so much that's good about humanity, all of us, all over the world. But the other thing is for us in the developing world, there's another imperative, which is more than our emotional and what we feel and the convictions and what the love that we have for our people. It's also an imperative in terms of the future for our children. You can't have my wife and I and my family living in luxury and in wealth, and side by side we live with people who are very, very poor.
Yeah. South Africa also is one of the most unequal countries when it comes to wealth and income.
Income inequality. Yeah.
Yes, very high Gini coefficient. So you have a very small percentage of people that are very well off, can afford healthcare, the best schools, can afford holidays. And then you have those that can barely afford to go to school, to get their children, to get good health services. So in that context, and also given our background, it's always been something that we knew we were going to do, give back to our communities. I was telling the story the other day that actually it was Patrice who met first with Warren Buffett, talking about the Giving Pledge, and he came home, to tell me about it. I had read about the Giving Pledge, and when he mentioned this idea to me and said that he's thinking that our family should join, I said to him, of course, I think that's what we should do. That's definitely what we should do. So it's something that we were both very much aware of, that we had been so lucky in life. We've worked hard, of course, but we had others along the way that helped us, that we needed to also give back and help many young South Africans, particularly those from impoverished families, become successful. As a result, the foundation sponsors young children from poor backgrounds to study science, technology, engineering, maths in some of the best universities in South Africa. And that is one of the projects that we do.
And one of the things that we focus on at the Institute to address this income inequality is the education of girls and the full involvement of women in economies globally. And I know that that's one of the themes that you've been focusing on. We have Fearless Girl in the lobby, thanks to our friends at State Street, and a whole content track this year on equality and focusing on gender parity in the workplace. When you think about that from a South African perspective, where are women on that continuum? I mean, how should we be thinking about bringing them into the fold, both economically and from an educational perspective?
Do you want to hear the answer from my husband this time?
Is it going to be the right answer?
She does a better job than I can because she does excellent work in relation to what happens with the women. I think you should...
Yeah, okay. So... throws it back at me. Well, in my work, you said that I trained as a medical doctor, and I decided to specialize in women's health. I've always been drawn towards women's issues. Firstly, because I became very aware of the injustice towards women as I grew up as a young child in South Africa. Throughout medical school, when we went on rounds with our, the doctors who trained us, I would feel that the female patients were shortchanged, and I made it my responsibility to study women's health and be that woman doctor who could help other medical students as well as help women become better understood. I've just felt that the medical care system was not fair to women. That was my assessment. Secondly, we talk about global poverty numbers and how that there was an article in Time magazine, and I think Bill Gates is one of the people that also talks about global poverty and how that was rapidly decreased. It came down a lot when a number of families in China moved into the middle class. That almost halved the levels of poverty in the world. So I use the same principle when it comes to women in South Africa. When you look at poverty in South Africa, which is our biggest issue as a foundation, reducing levels of poverty amongst our people, the poorest of the poor in South Africa are women who raise children, sometimes 5 to 6 per family, 10, in a family, and they are the sole breadwinners for the family. And I believe that if we are able to reach those women, we will be able to achieve our goal of reducing poverty in South Africa much more quickly, because we will be able to reach the women who then, use their money to take their children to school. They use it for healthcare services. They use it to really reduce levels of poverty within their families and within the community. So as part of the foundation's work, our focus has been on how we address the issue of women empowerment through education, through involving more women in sports, making sure that they have access to government services through the little black book that we produced. And when we have netball matches, I make sure that he gives out the prizes to the girls. My dad gave me that gift, so I make sure that whenever I have men who are part of my network, they mentor and sponsor young women.
It's great. So I want to stay on the children notion for a moment, because Africa is the youngest continent by far. The median age on the continent is 19. In Uganda, the median age is 15. And the UN is projecting that between now and 2050, fully half of the population growth in the world will occur in Africa. So the population is going to grow from 1.3 billion to 2.7 billion. So, Patrice, how do you think about creating an economy to sustain all of these people, particularly in light of automation taking away traditional jobs?
I mean, that's a very important issue. There's discussion about the growth of the youth in Africa as a demographic dividend, but there's also a recognition that if we are not going to educate, train, provide skills, create a bright future for the youth, the demographic dividend could become a demographic curse. Mm-hmm. It's very, very important, because you cannot have hundreds of millions of young Africans who cannot find jobs, whose standards of living does not improve significantly, whose livelihoods, whose living conditions do not succeed significantly. And that's why education is critically important, but the appropriate kind of education, education that allows young Africans to compete with young people throughout the world, the provision of skills and expertise that will allow the continent to focus on those commercial, trade, business areas where Africa has got a competitive advantage. There's extensive discussions of what is referred to as the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things. A lot of these things go totally above my head. I always feel comfortable when people who are much smarter and brighter than I am, and we had a meeting a week or so ago with some of the most successful entrepreneurs and leaders in the development of modern technology. And there were CEOs some of whom run some of the biggest banks in the world, and I felt a bit better because they said, we don't understand what's going on. I don't think any of us do. But it's very exciting, incredibly exciting. And that's why Africa has to make itself a good place for investment. If an investor in New York or London or Japan or Germany has $1 billion, they can invest anywhere in the world. So our economies, our countries, have to compete to prove that we're a good place to do business, we're competitive, we will give higher returns, it's a safe place to do business, and our overall dispensation creates a future for investment, because that's the key to create a bright future in terms of turning this demographic dividend into a demographic dividend that will benefit young Africans.
Okay. So Precious, as you lead the foundation, how do you think about longer term versus shorter term goals? I know you made a significant contribution to Ebola a few years ago. When I'm advising philanthropists around the world, I try and get them to think, is the money growing faster than the problem that you're trying to address? Should we be thinking in terms of how we step into curing some of these things? So when you think about the long and shorter term goals that you're trying to accomplish in Africa and elsewhere, how do you think about that?
Well, so we started the foundation in 2003, and our focus at that time was just purely on giving out bursaries and education, exactly because of the issue that Patrice raises. We've got to make sure that we've got young people that will be ready to get into the job market and have the right skills, and hence our focus on STEM. We then moved into other things, other projects. We tried some where we were not successful, trying to drive entrepreneurship in South Africa. Some of it worked, some didn't work. Our long-term focus, our goal that we will always be driving, and that informs everything else that we do, is the issue of poverty alleviation. I think it's something that will be a long-term goal, long after Patrice and I are gone. Hopefully it will be, be reduced, but we see our children still working in areas with that kind of umbrella. We do projects that are short-term, yes, which will create value in the communities that we work with. But our focus is particularly around sustainable projects that will enable the communities to become self-sustaining themselves. So, we have this long-term focus of our objective of alleviating poverty, and we look at projects that are in the now that would help people become self-sustaining in their own communities, so they're not always dependent on the foundation.
That's right.
So we're just about out of time, but what are you both optimistic about? What makes you most hopeful today?
She's my source of optimism, so that. No, but I think this is a great country, and I always say to my American friends who haven't. I mean, we worked here for some time. I always encourage those who haven't traveled to travel around the world and to recognize how fortunate and how privileged they are to live in this great country. So the world needs countries, just like as young people, we need role models to look up to. So when America withdraws from climate change, and America's prime, if not sole responsibility, is to look after America, and we support that. And we want President Trump to do well, we want America to do well. And I fully support that the main objective of an American president is to look after America. But I don't think it's in the interest of the world that America disengages from the world. I'm just We get inspired from traveling all over the world, and it's about values, it's about norms. I mean, this country has produced some of the greatest leaders, not just who inspired America, but who've inspired the world. It gives us a lot of confidence. There's a lot of good things happening in the developing world, in South America, in Brazil, in India, in China, in Europe. There are challenges in Africa, but the youth give us so much optimism. They are hardworking, creative, and of course you've got to recognize the challenges and the areas where we need to improve, but I think all of us should focus on the innate goodness of mankind and that which makes us a better species. I was looking at what they were talking about, these hominids and others, and mankind will do well. There's more good in this planet, there's more good in this world than what is not so good.
That's great.
Yeah.
Infectious disease?
Yeah, I think for me it's three things. I look at my children, I have so much hope, and look at them and their friends and their generation. They really give me hope. I think they will achieve great things, going forward. What gives me hope also is, the country that I come from, South Africa, which was under apartheid for such a long time, produced a Nelson Mandela who came out of prison after 27 years and simply forgave and wanted to move on. There is that kindness, that humanity that Patrice talks about, and you find that globally. That gives me hope for my country. And lastly, what gives me hope is what I see around the world when it comes to issues around women empowerment, issues around, I was at a session today where people were talking about the Me Too movement. I'm very hopeful when I see that issues that people have been so silent about over many years are now coming up and are being spoken about. And to have the Milken conference address these issues is very important, I think.
Well, thank you. So I want to thank you for tonight. I want to thank you for letting me work you all week. And it's a gift for me personally to know you both as well as I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to take a brief minute, and then we'll be back with the Camerons. Wait a minute.
That salad's totally grossing me out. I've completely lost my appetite. How long have you been a meat eater for? I only eat meat. I'm going to the Meat Stock Flesh Festival. Are you going? Yeah, I want the tofu spring rolls, except I don't eat tofu, so do you have like a tofu flavored chicken you can substitute in for me? It's not that vegetable eaters are bad people, it's just that they're terrible people. This sausage is a meat-based vegetable substitute for cucumber. It's got the taste and the texture of an actual cucumber, with none of the cucumber. Eating plants makes your body way too alkaline, which will definitely kill you. Do you really want that? All you need is some meat to be healthy and thrive. You get everything you need from meat. Beef is loaded with carbs. Orcas are even more spiritually evolved than humans, and they only eat seal meat. So that means humans should only eat meat, because it's the most spiritually evolved diet, because of orcas.
Welcome. Please run Suzy here and James there.
I'll go along. Hi there. Buzz. Hey, how you doing? Buzz Aldrin in the house. Right here.
You never know who's in the audience. Okay, well, thank you. So, Jim and Suzy, as I was preparing for this, I came across a statistic in some of the pieces that you put together that 14.5% of greenhouse gases come from the animal agriculture sector. That's more than all transportation combined. So, how did we get so wrongly focused on this issue? Like, why is everyone thinking that it's something else? And then how did you start on your path towards veganism?
Well, that's kind of a broad question, but you can talk about how we got on the path.
Okay, so May 6th, 6 years ago, because we're coming up on our 6-year anniversary, I was told to watch Forks Over Knives, and I had it sitting in my office for, 9 months, and I finally grabbed it and watched it, and it just stopped me cold. And so then I talked to Jim, and I said, I have something, I need you for an hour and a half tomorrow. And he said, oh, cool, where are we going? And I said, no, we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to watch a movie. And he was kind of like, oh, cool, I like movies. So
like, that's my day job.
But I didn't tell him what it was, because I just wanted us to watch it cold together and then have a conversation about it. And by the time we got into the kitchen, he said we shouldn't have any more animal products in the house. And 24 hours later, the kitchen was cleaned out. And so it started that way. And I know it's a small percentage of people that, want to blow up their kitchen and make that happen. Yeah. But then what happened was Jim really taught me about all the environmental impacts. So it was kind of...
Well, see, I had been very cognizant of the environmental impacts of animal agriculture, but I thought, well, I need my protein, damn it. Tough. No, I just thought, well, people won't really change, and that's not really an avenue to pursue. And I felt that if I was going to injure my health in order to serve an environmental cause, that was probably cutting a little too deep. When I saw Forks Over Knives, it was an instant flip. I already had the pull toward the sort of the ethics and the morality of eating a plant-based diet, but I had actually had it backwards. I actually thought that it was deleterious to your health, when in fact it's quite the opposite. I think most people that are fairly well informed know it. They may be busy tuning it out, because denial ain't just a river in Egypt. But if you really study it, the science is very, very strong on the health impacts of a whole food plant-based diet. So once I put the two pieces together, and I did my homework too, I read the China study cover to cover a couple times, a very compelling case from Colin Campbell's 40-some years of research, and I think 75 or 80 personally conducted, double-blind trials and so on the subject. Once I realized that it was a win-win, that it was a win environmentally and for climate change, and it was a win personally for our health and for our children's health, it was a slam dunk for me. Mm-hmm. Because it was relative, because we're very decisive and kind of willful people. We kind of just looked around like, how come everybody's not doing this? And then, but in the 6 years since, I think we've tried to drill down into what are the barriers to entry for people, even when they know the facts or have heard it 14 times. What stops you? What stops you from doing it? Yes, we love cheese. Yes, we love steak. Yeah, I get all that. But there are other things that you know, responsible people trying to approach it. Right. You know, there's the protein myth. Am I, especially as a male, and this skews more male, am I going to get the protein that I need to be a big, strong man? It's really deeply seated and enculturated kind of behavior patterns. And so we're making a film called The Game Changers. I'm going to talk about that later, maybe, to blow up that myth, because it is a myth, and it's an enculturated myth.
So it's interesting that a film was really what caused you to entertain veganism, and you, being a filmmaker, can use that medium to push that message. Why don't we show the clip that we have? Jim, you have this extraordinary platform, right? The director of the most successful film in history, with more coming. How do you think about getting this message across through that medium with the ability to touch literally millions of people around the planet?
Well, it did, you know, and I spent Avatar, I spent a considerable amount of time afterwards trying to think about how exactly did that work and why did it work so well across so many cultures. And I think that, you know, we are suffering just as a civilization in general from nature deficit disorder, and we do want to reconnect. We want to reconnect with our roots, or we feel that there's something missing. And, you know, more people live in cities now than don't for the first time in history as of, I don't know, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago. So, you know, Avatar reached people on that level, but it also reached a lot of indigenous leaders worldwide who are literally struggling at the front lines with the encroachment of civilization and development. And they reached out to us, to me, and said, come help us, come be our ally. And that's how we wound up down in Brazil on several trips working with the Kayapo, some of the other tribes that you see pictured there. And it really made it quite vivid for us how much we're losing on a daily basis. We're basically losing an acre of rainforest a second, something like that. It's pretty sobering, it's pretty daunting. And the 80% of Brazilian rainforest is being cut down to make either pasture land or cropland to grow food to feed animals. And it's an almost criminally inefficient land use. And for us to all eat the way we collectively eat, I'm not saying here tonight, I know you're having the sea bass, but if we all worldwide ate at the level that we eat here in America and some of the other developed countries, we'd need 4 more Earths standing behind the one that we have right now. So there's an inherent kind of social justice aspect to that. We literally can't all eat that way. And aside from all of the overshoot factors and climate change and all of those issues. So I became more educated after I had made the film, when I got this bounce back, this resonation from everybody else out there who was literally suffering at the front lines, whether it was climate change, the indigenous communities, and so on. And that made us more aware of how it was a win-win to be on a whole food, plant-based nutritional lifestyle program, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. So, Suzy, I want to turn to you. You and I were actually on a panel a couple of years ago talking about the innovation you were embedding in the MUSE school.
Right.
And since that time, that school has gone vegan.
Yes.
So I'd like to, what was the response from the parents of children in the school when you surfaced this as a notion to go vegan?
Well, it was full-on mutiny, really. We really decided that, we couldn't, it's an environmental school. We start at 2 years old and go all the way through high school. And the children it's solar powered, it's low to zero waste, it's really about the environment and the children learning sustainability. We've got a seed to table program. Okay. So they're already growing 80%. We've got about 150 raised beds, are already growing 50 to 80% of the produce that they're eating every day, depending on what time of year it is.
And we solved the agricultural labor problem. We just use kids.
Yes, exactly. But we just really realized that we couldn't call ourselves an environmental school and be serving animal products. So we took 18 months to educate everyone, and we brought in doctors, and we brought in chefs, and we brought in climate scientists, and authors, and athletes to come in and spend time with the children, speaking to them in developmentally appropriate ways about being plant-based. And then in the evenings, we had the teachers and the adults, and we opened it up to the public to come and hear them speak, and we gave them beautiful plant-based food and a glass of wine. And even after all that time, because we chose fall of 15 to go 100% plant-based, we lost 50% of our families.
Wow.
Yeah. Now,
But we kept 50%. So veganism is only 2% of the population,
Right.
so that's actually kind of a victory.
And wine is a plant-based food. I'm
Exactly. But we quickly regained our enrollment, and we've now surpassed it. We had 2 families move all the way from New York this year just to come to the school. And the pushback really was about, you touched on it a little bit, that people, they thought that their children's brains were going to shrivel up and fall out of their heads, basically. So we had Dr. Neil Barnard and Dean Ornish come in and create a document for us. And on average, a child that's raised plant-based is taller, and on average, they have a higher IQ. So we still had pushback, even after all of that. And so it just really became one of these things where it's like, okay, fine, people. You can feed them eggs and bacon in the morning, not that we really wanted them to, and a burger at nighttime. It's one meal a day, OMD. So it was, that's...
Well, that was the birth of OMD.
It was the birth of OMD.
So skipping ahead with a little plug, but Suzy's book is OMD, one meal a day for the planet. But it was born out of that argument. It's like, okay, have a bacon cheeseburger for breakfast if that's what you want.
Exactly.
1 meal a day.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing was that now I'm sitting with my crew of 150 people on Avatar 2 and 3, which we're busy in production with right now. And when we started production in September, I said, guys, and I call them guys even though it's a mixed crew, about 50-50. And I said, guys, we got to walk the walk. With the theme of Avatar, we should really have the greenest set in the film business. And so, we put in a 1 megawatt power system on top of the sound stages down at Manhattan Beach. That was a pretty good start because we use a tremendous amount of energy with our systems, our machine room, petaflops of data, all that sort of thing. So we're, full recycling, zero waste, all that sort of thing. I said, we have to eat vegan also. It got very quiet. I said, so I made the pitch. And the thing that changed their mind was it's 1 meal a day. You can have whatever you want for breakfast, you have whatever you want for dinner, but you're going to give something back 1 meal a day. And that resonated with them. And they were visualizing a plate with a couple of carrots and a Brussels sprout. Okay, all right, fine. I'll eat like a rabbit for 1 meal a day. Now, we brought in a chef. It's a husband and wife team, actually, that make, I think, great comfort food. I mean, you don't have to think of it as the best vegetables. Think of it as Thai, think of it as Italian, think of it as pizza, think of it as Mexican, whatever. You eat the food you're familiar with. It just happens to not have any meat in it whatsoever. Yeah. It's recognizable. And it was painless. I got 150 people eating vegan food. And most of them came to me and said, if I could do that all the time and it tasted this good, I'd do it. And so that's a breakthrough. That's moving the needle.
The research that you're referencing really said that that's not true, right? So you're not really giving up nutrition. Your performance is not going to suffer from eating plant-based foods.
These are the myths.
And you have a documentary coming out about that. Is that correct?
Suzy and I are executive producers on a film that's directed by Luis Cihoyos, who did The Cove, if you remember that. It won an Academy Award about the dolphin slaughter in Japan. And the approach is there are three sort of pillars of plant-based nutrition. The first one that started back with Socrates, I think, but became quite popular in the 70s was obviously animal cruelty. The next one was the emergence of the health story, which really started in the 80s, but came to the forefront in the 90s and early this century. And then the newer story, which people are less familiar with, is the environmental connection, the 14.5% of greenhouse gases, sitting at the nexus of all the major environmental problems is animal agriculture. That's a relatively new story. The one that hasn't been touched yet at all until this film drops, which hopefully will be in fall, is performance, athletic performance. So that's the fourth pillar, in a sense. And it's a film that very compellingly shows that athletes who switch to a vegan diet for whatever reason, sometimes it's to deal with injury and recovery, sometimes it's just to eke out a few extra percentage points of performance, do better. They just do better. And we're not talking about the gracile sports like ultramarathons, although they benefit greatly. But it's basketball, it's football, American football, it's weightlifting. The U.S. Representative at the Olympics in weightlifting is vegan. The strongest man in the world, literally, Guinness Book of World Records, the guy who can lift more weight and walk with it across a stage this size, I think it's something like 1,300 pounds.
Right. And he can
pick it up and walk with it, 1,300 pounds. Think about that for a second. That's, I think, that's more than a Fiat.
And he can tip over a car, too.
He can turn a car over. Vegan.
Yeah.
And so it really is meant to disrupt the myth of protein, which is enculturated. It's what our moms and dads taught us. It's what the food industry would love us to believe. It's what the meat and dairy industry has carefully cultivated over time. But the fact is that we're basically drowning in protein. The average American is eating 2 to 3 times more protein than they need, and it's mostly the wrong type. Plant proteins are just better for you in all regards. And, look, the facts are all out there. We don't have time right now to go into it in that kind of detail. I would definitely encourage you to pursue it. There are some great books on the subject, and there's a tremendous amount of research. It mostly exists in a blind spot for people who have decided in advance that they don't want to go down this road, so they don't really want to know the facts. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we've spent our time, is how do we deal with those perceptual barriers to entry for people who kind of already know what the answer is, but don't want to really look at the facts because they've made up their mind ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. And Suzy, from a practical perspective for people in the audience, when you go home and you tell your children, we're not going to have ice cream anymore, there's no more hamburgers in the house, I mean, how did your children respond? And then is the flip side to that, isn't there an investment opportunity to take advantage of putting positive capital towards something like this?
Yes. Right. Well, telling the children, so luckily, one of them was really little, and so she's probably been the easiest, exactly. The other ones we've got 28, 25, 17, 14, and 11 now, and the baby is definitely more on board than the other ones are, but they think they're naughty if they're like putting Parmesan cheese on their pasta. And to me, it's like if they think
better than heroin.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, they're going to experiment, and they're going to be at their friend's house. And the thing that we find is that behaviorally, obviously, it's about your support group and your peer group and that sort of thing.
And most parents, when they talk about their kids experimenting, aren't talking about Parmesan cheese, right?
Right. Exactly.
That's Suzy's point.
So if that's the least, that's great.
Yeah. But the thing is that we only have plant-based food in the house. the school that they go to only serves plant-based food, so they kind of don't have a real way out.
But I think there's more to it than that. I think the way to get kids to eat vegetables is to have them grow vegetables, harvest the vegetables, cook the cook it, get the whole seed to table concept, and have a peer group around them that likes that as well, enjoys the activity, thinks of it as a challenge. For my most recent birthday, when I turned 63, our youngest daughter, who's 11, gave me as a present a loaf of bread. She planted the wheat, she grew it, she harvested it, she ground it, made it into flour, cooked it, made a loaf of bread from scratch, from zero. I think that's quite an accomplishment for an 11-year-old. You know, she did it. She had some mentoring on it. But to understand that food isn't a thing that comes from a store, that food is something that you can control, that you can own, that you can grow for yourself, that you can know its provenance in a world of toxicity and so on, and various things that, E. coli and things like that you might be ingesting. Millennials, were finding our research, they want to know where their food comes from. They want to know, maybe not the farmer's name, but in the food products that we're making, you will be able to know the farmer's name and the field that it's grown in. They want a transparency back up the chain.
Right.
And I think that's going to be an investment opportunity for people as we see this shift toward more scrutiny and a requirement for more transparency. That's an area that people can get out ahead and make some money, we're thinking. And plant-based protein is a very rapid growth sector as well, as people start to wake up to the value of plant-based protein and the necessity for it.
Mm-hmm. Suzy, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that children also are a great way to infect adults as well. Mm-hmm. So what we have found is that when the children realize that the food is delicious, they go home, they tell mom and dad, they tell their aunties and uncles and their grandma and grandpas and things like that. And we get multiple calls saying, how do I do compost? How do I create a raised bed? Can you give me some recipes?
Okay, that's great.
So it is great.
So for all the people here, as they go back to the homes and wherever they come from all over the world, what can they do? Like, how is this scalable? I want to talk about 1 meal a day. I think there are cards on each of the tables, and I think we have a short video. So why don't we play the video first, and then we can talk about action plan.
Mm-hmm.
That slide with the data went by pretty quickly, but it is extraordinary, just the impact of giving up 1 meal a day and the impact on water and the environment. So
Right.
what should people be doing? Is this easier or harder than it looks? Why are more people not doing this?
I think it can be very easy, actually. So there is a card at everyone's place setting. So you talked about it going by really fast. This is a pledge that we do at school at the beginning of every year, and the children take it, and the parents take it, and the teachers take it as well. So it's one of the things that was always really difficult for me being in the environmental sector is you watch all of these horrific films or read books and realize it's like, yeah, what can I do as an individual? And ultimately, every single time you choose to eat plant-based, you cut your water footprint and your carbon footprint in half. So the pledge itself is 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day or all in, 3 meals a day, and it gives you the environmental savings. I mean, you save 194,667 gallons of water just with 1 meal a day, and the carbon equivalent of 3,077 miles driven in your car. So, my hope and dream is that everyone in the world would start at least with 1 meal a day. And so the book is coming out October 15th, but we're kicking off a campaign. So you think about Meatless Mondays on steroids, basically. And that starts September 4th. And we are working with schools and grocery stores and restaurants and hotels and corporations and studios and airlines and things like that. So it's a way to not only empower your employees or your family members, but it's also a way of showing, as a company, that you really care about the environment. And I know that more and more companies are trying to do that. So it's a great way to do that, and we'd love for you to join our OMD team, for sure.
Great.
I'd just like to give a shout out to everybody here. I respect your stature as business people, as innovators, as leaders, and I think part of this is about just taking it in and making it part of who you are, and then that will emanate to your corporate culture, to your teammates, and so on. And I'd also encourage you as business leaders and innovators to think of ways to get ahead on this, to have your company find ways to expand the products, because one of the biggest barriers to entry right now is people can't find the kind of foods that they want. It's changed a lot in the last 5 years, and you've got rapidly growing companies like Beyond Meat and others that are creating not lab-grown meats, but meats that are based on pea protein or alfalfa protein, or sometimes it's wheat protein, that sort of thing. We like the nexus of the right. What comes out of the soil. A big investment for us is the Verdient company in Canada, in Saskatchewan, where it's the pulse capital of the world. So pulses are nitrogen fixers. So we're reducing the requirement for nitrogen fertilizer. So if you're growing properly, if you're starting to break down the industrial agriculture paradigm, you're looking at, if you look at one of these little flower petal Venn diagrams. Here it shows how animal agriculture is at the nexus of most of the major environmental problems, whether it's climate change, runoff pollution, ocean dead zones, all that sort of thing. Let's see what we have. Acidifying oceans, carbon dioxide, destruction of forests, climate change, drought, floods, polluted water, all these things. Animal agriculture is sitting right at the intersection set of that Venn diagram. So we can do a lot if we can reduce that, if we can change our whole land use perspective, and if we can shift more toward plant proteins. This is something, here's what I think you should consider from a business perspective. For us to survive as a civilization more than about another 100 years, we have to do this anyway. We don't have a choice. So it seems to me that if you can make money at that, something you've got to do anyway as a society, that's all I need to know. So we're all in. All of our investment is around changing consciousness around plant-based nutrition, plant-based proteins, food products from plant proteins, and so on, because it's inevitable. We're all going to wind up there. Nobody wants to hear that, but it's a wedge, and that wedge is just going to keep growing.
And it's a positive one, right? It's not so much about what you're giving up. There's the positivity factor here that's important. So
absolutely. And
well, I want to thank you both. I want to thank you both for your leadership on this issue and devoting so much of your time and personal resources towards it. And everybody has the pledge card. I hope you all take the 1 meal a day challenge. Thank you.
I want to say one more thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So take your card home, put it on your fridge, tell your friends and family about it, and choose 1 meal or 2 meals or 3 meals a day.
Great.
Isn't she persuasive? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So please, we're going to open up the dessert stations shortly, and then we'll have the late night program will begin in about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.